Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the AdaptiBar Torts webinar. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Grossman, MBE expert, as well as AdaptiBar video lecturer, and he will be providing some tips and strategies for conquering the Torts bar exam subject. I'll hand it back to you, Jonathan.
Good to be with you, Jacob, and all you guys out there. Who doesn't love tort, right? But a lot of professors wasted 6 months of our lives talking about Cardoza and some sort of zone, a danger thing, some sort of circle or something. And so even though we say, I know duty, breach, causation, damages, we're still in the 50 percentile, even in easy subjects like negligence. A lot of times on the MBE, the easier the subject, the more difficult the question. So what we'll do today is give you an approach of how to improve yourself with the tort questions, maximize your skill, and know a good approach to distinguish some of these concepts, and you'll be maximizing the points on the tort questions like you should.
Thank you for the intro, Jonathan, and I'll hand it back to you to provide some strategies for boosting their torts MBE scores.
So, you feel confident about tort, you like tort, or some people will call me and say, incredibly, John, I never learned a lot of tort. Okay, either way, doesn't matter. The bar tells you in their outline that half of all the tort questions are coming from the chapter called negligence. That's half the questions right there. But a lot of students make the mistake that just means duty, breach, causation, damages. That's one way they test you on negligence. So in terms of approach, most important thing I can tell you about negligence is there are 3 basic ways that they're going to test you on the issue of negligence. There are some questions that are specifically testing you on what I call common law negligence, duty, breach, causation, damages. The second way they're going to test you on negligence is a separate issue called negligence per se. And the third way that you're going to be tested is on something called res ipsa. Some people like res ipsa loquitur. Res ipsa. Res ipsa, negligence per se, common law negligence. Those are 3 different rules, 3 different kinds of questions that you need to focus on. If you're just thinking foreseeability and breach all the time, that's why you're missing questions. Do all these hypos tend to look the same? Yes, that's why one of John's foundational mantras is you got to keep all of the rules separate. On an essay, you can argue all, either, capital E. They're either testing you on a common law negligence hypo or negligence per se or res ipsa. You want to focus on do you know the legal differences between those 3? And can you recognize those in the actual question? Similarly, strict liability, product liability. The whole country mushes these 2 concepts together. Not everything is defective, like some of the outlines will say. There's strict liability, where there's 2 activities that you could be strictly liable for, or there's product liability. I bought the widget, it broke or doesn't work, now I want to sue somebody. That's a separate concept from strict liability. In tort, a lot of this stuff blends together. IED, NIED. Trespass to chattel and conversion. What's the fundamental problem? Everyone reviews the outline, but does not focus on the elemental legal definitions. That's what they're testing you on. You think you know what this is because you skim the outline and it makes sense when you're reading it. Really make sure you know the elements. How do I know if I know the elements, like I always say? Recite. Keep these rules separate. These are not difficult concepts, but too many of them look the same. Defamation, invasion of privacy. Everyone gets tripped up with that. So step 1 is making sure that I'm keeping every tort separate and know they're only testing me on 1 at a time. Second, a lot of times the answer choices, like in other subjects like Crim Pro, will give you a lot of the defenses and exceptions. Assumption of the risk is an answer for like 20 of the tort questions. They like to talk about comparative and contributory negligence and assumption of the risk. What's one of my generic mantras for all the questions? Never apply a defense or an exception unless that's what the fact pattern's talking about. Legally, does it always make sense in your head? No, if John assumed the risk. Yeah, because if he assumed the risk, then he wouldn't be liable. Yeah, that makes sense to me. But if the fact pattern doesn't talk about assumption of the risk, it's not the correct answer. My point is in tort, like a lot of other subjects, there's a lot of legally correct statements of law in the answers. The reason they're wrong is because that's not what the fact pattern's talking about. How will I know if I assume the risk? They have to tell me. Once again, like all the subjects, make the facts tell you. In negligence questions, never infer that there was causation. A lot of times there's a duty, A lot of times there's damages, but if they didn't cause the accident, there's no liability. That's negligence. They always make it look like they must be negligent, but how do I know if all the elements are proven? The facts have to tell me. Don't infer, don't presume. Just because I'm in a public place and there was an accident, I'm injured, does not mean that they committed negligence. Causation, make the fact pattern prove it. So in some of the common law negligence questions, you're always presuming they must have been negligent because I'm an invitee or a licensee. Just because they had a duty of care does not automatically mean they're liable for negligence. I got to make sure that the fact pattern tells me that they did something wrong. Or I'm mushing together res ipsa negligence per se and common law negligence, and I'm not separating the three. Well, since half of the questions on tort are of those three concepts, you better make sure you're doing a good job distinguishing. Or three, you're not over applying the defense and not focusing on what the facts say. Strict and product liability have to be kept separate. Intentional and negligent infliction, trespass to chattel and conversion. Make sure you're keeping the rules separate. You focus on what they're specifically testing you on, so you know what you're looking for. Separate the defenses and intentional tort from the defenses of negligence. A lot of times they'll give you a negligence hypo, and they'll say, is John liable? No, if Bob consented. But consent or self-defense, these are defenses to intentional tort. There can't be a defense to negligence. You follow what I'm saying? People are mushing all the defenses together. There are defenses to intentional tort. There are defenses to negligence. Keep those separate. So in tort, because conceptually it's easier material and everyone has a handle on it, the hypos are easier to read. We get in our own head and we start presuming liability. We start presuming where we think it's going. The easier the material, the more overconfident we tend to get, and we read a little too quick and we presume where the answer is going to go. And we're missing these key words and phrases in the facts. So if you make a mistake in tort, you should ask yourself, did I forget the rule? Or did I know the rule, but I totally, like he said, I tried to presume I knew where this was going. I didn't slow down. In tort, the number one thing is for negligence is to make sure you know whether you're doing a negligence per se, or res ipsa question. Don't apply that defense unless that's what the facts are talking about. Know your intentional tort elements. Keep those defenses separate. Don't combine the intentional tort defenses with the negligent defenses, etc. And since many of the questions in tort just say, if John sues Bob for his damages, will he prevail? The call of the question doesn't always name the tort. How will I know which tort they're testing me on? The facts. Like all the other subjects, my one common denominator tip is focus more on your issue spotting in the facts so you know specifically what tort they're testing you on, which means you know what answer you're looking for, which will mean that you're able to shut up and pick it more aggressively. If you keep your rules separate and you don't overthink, you will maximize those points in tort.
And that wraps up our torts webinar. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. For further guidance on any MBE subject or torts specifically, you can check out the AdaptiBar video lecture series, which will be linked below. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll let Jonathan sign us off.
Torts essays can be easy. The torts subject can be easy. Make sure you're maximizing your points by being careful. Black letter, reading comp, keeping everything separate, have a good, consistent approach, and most of all, shut up and pick it. Best of luck.